conservative. Kat, thank you so much for tuning in. And with me, Representative Darren LaHood. He's your congressman, folks. And Representative LaHood, we are going to be covering a whole slew of topics today. But I want to start with Benjamin Netanyahu, how he addressed Congress. You were there. You had this photo with him. Tell us about who wasn't there, because I was reading about how many, I couldn't believe it, over, I think, 100 people or 100 Democrats in the House weren't there, 50 or 20 or something like that of the senators. It's staggering numbers from the Democrat side of the aisle were in attendance when Benjamin Netanyahu was delivering his address to Congress.
Well, Kat, thanks for having me on. I was proudly in the chamber last week for our joint session of Congress with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. I think as Americans, as elected officials, when we have our number one ally in the Middle East and the only democracy, we should put our partisanship, put America and what our country stands for above partisanship. But clearly the Democrats didn't do that. As you mentioned, Kamala Harris wasn't there. Patty Murray, who's the Democrat pro temp in the Senate, wasn't there. And 100 of my colleagues didn't show up. So I think it was disrespectful, un-American not to be there to support Israel, again, our number one ally, and who's at war with terrorists, that being Hamas in Gaza right now. And so, again, I proudly was there as a member of Congress for the 16th District, but also as an American to show support for Israel and what Netanyahu is doing to fight a barbaric terrorist organization in Hamas.
I wanted to ask, say a Harris presidency happens. Are we worried that she's going to shift her focus away from Israel? Biden seems to have, at least publicly shown some support now. What that looks like on the financial end, I don't know. Would she pull financial support from Israel? I know that the pro-Palestinian base of hers, or the radical left, probably would prefer she pull out if she were to become president. Do you fear she would break off that allyship with Israel?
Of course. I worry on a lot of different levels for our country on an international standpoint, from an international standpoint and a national security standpoint. I don't think Kamala Harris can be trusted when it comes to securing our country on a lot of different levels. Remember, she had one job, Kat, that was the border czar. That's what she was put in charge of. And that's been an epic failure. It is an unmitigated disaster at our southern border. And that's the view of many Democrats also that live along the border communities along the border with Mexico. So I think she's done an abysmal job there. You look at the disastrous policies of Afghanistan and pulling out of Afghanistan and killing and having creating 13 Gold Star moms, right? And Gold Star families because they were murdered in Afghanistan. And so if that is any indication of her foreign policy experience between the border and Afghanistan, I worry for the country. I worry about our national security, and I worry about the strength of the United States.
Well, and I don't know if you've heard anything, but the Wall Street Journal had reported former officials are saying that Kamala Harris is not going to keep some advisors to Biden and some staff, including the Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin. I don't know if there's any truth to that. If you've heard anything about, hey, if she becomes president, I'm going to gut all of these advisors who tell me to support Israel. Because frankly, I don't want to, or whatever her, position is there, why she wouldn't want to support Israel, I don't know.
I would say on that, Kat, I mean, she sided with the most liberal, progressive, left-wing elements of the Democrat Party. Remember, during the Antifa riots and during the Black Lives Matter riots, she set up a bail fund to bail out these rioters and contributed to it. So I have no doubt that if she was to become president, that she's going to abandon any of those advisors that at least exercise some form of common sense under the Biden administration, whether that's supporting Israel or at least looking out for law enforcement across this country. I worry about that. And the country, I think, needs to be worried.
Hmm. Another topic I wanted to talk about today, obviously, I don't think it's going to go anywhere. He has to do this all via constitutional amendment to reform the Supreme Court. There's a few things he wants to do, including term limiting some justices, the Supreme Court justices. He wants to get rid of the presidential immunity. It's not blanket immunity, folks. We've talked about that before, but it's not blanket immunity. I mean, there's still ways to impeach a president, and there's ways to impeach justices and things like that. So, the senator, Dick Durbin, has come out and said multiple times that he thinks Clarence Thomas, or at least he indicates that he thinks Clarence Thomas has received bribes in that decision about the presidential immunity when they prosecuted President Donald Trump. Said he had presidential immunity. But your thoughts, is it going to come to the House? I mean, how does this all kind of work? It has to be constitutional amendment, right? So there has to be 2/3 and then some in the House in order for him to push any of this past, right?
Well, I think this is a radical approach to try to change the Supreme Court because liberals and Democrats don't like the decisions that have been made, whether that's on immunity, whether that's on the Dobbs decision, whether that's on standing up for the Constitution. They want to radically change the Supreme Court. I think it violates the Constitution. I think it violates our separation of powers. I think this is a power grab by, again, Democrats and radicals and progressives that don't like the current makeup of the Supreme Court. We finally have 6 good Republican conservative justices on the Supreme Court. They were approved by the U.S. Senate. They went through the proper process, and they don't like the decisions they've made. So I don't think there's going to be any support by any Republicans in the House on that, and there shouldn't be because of the constitutional concerns that I have and many others have. So I think this is dead on arrival, and it should be.
Mm. Another thing I wanted to chat about before we move away from, really the democracy, I guess, or constitutional republic, you look at things happening in Venezuela with this election. They start protesting and they think that the election results are fraudulent over there. Maduro. I was reading a little bit about what Biden has done and these oil sanctions, right? He pulled back on a lot of these oil sanctions for Venezuela. There have been 400,000 plus, I think, Venezuelans given, like the green light to come into the country. I've heard that their prisons, the Venezuelan prisons, they're just opening up the prisons. There's a deal made where, hey, if you're a prisoner here in Venezuela, you can go to the United States. And if you go to the United States, then we'll let you out of prison here in Venezuela. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but clearly President Joe Biden doesn't seem to be being very tough on Venezuela at this point. Although the United States has come out and said that they have serious concerns about the Maduro claim of victory. So I don't know, your thoughts there, our relationship with Venezuela, what should we be doing with Venezuela and this at an international level, this maybe fraudulent election?
Well, I think you raise a number of good points. I serve on the House Intelligence Committee. I can't necessarily get into classified information, but I will say Maduro is directly aligned with our adversaries around the globe, whether that's Iran, whether that's Russia, whether that's China, North Korea. He cannot be trusted. He is a dictator. He is an authoritarian. I think there was clearly fraudulent activity in this last election. I don't think the Biden administration in loosening the oil sanctions made the right decision there. He cannot be trusted. I also look to a number of my colleagues that represent South Florida and large populations of Venezuelans that have come here legally, that understand the consequences of Maduro staying in power. When you reduce those oil sanctions, you just give him the opportunity to have more money, kind of like what Biden did in Iran. President Trump had weakened Iran, and then Biden got in and relaxed the sanctions on oil, and now Iran has billions and billions of dollars, and they're exercising that in malign activities, whether that's the Houthis in Yemen, whether that's Hamas in Gaza, whether that's Hezbollah in Lebanon, or whether that's the Iran proxies in Iraq right now. Similarly, in Venezuela, that's what you're doing by loosening those sanctions, is giving Maduro more money and more resources to try to hurt the United States. The last point, and you referenced it, they have opened up their prisons and mental wards to allow people to come through our southern border, from Venezuela. We've seen this happen month after month. We see it here in Illinois. If you go see many of the illegal immigrants that have come to this country, Illinois and Chicago is now a border city and a border state. And I worry about the criminals that have come from places like Venezuela that have come across our unmitigated disaster, which is our southern border, and allowing that to happen.
One more topic, Goshen, and then I promise to let you go, Representative. We don't chat enough. That's why we're hitting so many of these topics. We don't chat enough. Okay, so kudos to you. You've kind of led the charge on this, where you started calling out, hey, Goshen has ties to the Chinese Communist Party. They also have ties to companies who are practicing human rights violations, are actively using slave labor. Tell me where we're at as far as Goshen goes. At the federal level, are we trying to stop this thing from popping up here in Michigan? I know you're working with the representative out of Michigan. What are we doing at a federal level? Can you just give us an update?
Well, sure. Let's set the stage. Goshen is a proposed EV battery company that has direct ties to the Chinese Communist Party, period, full stop. When you think about state-owned enterprises in China, Goshen is directly tied to a state-owned enterprise. They now want to come to the United States and get taxpayer-funded subsidies, both in Michigan and Illinois. So they have two proposed plants, one in Green Township, Michigan, which is near Big Rapids, Michigan, and another one in Manteno, Illinois, in Kankakee County, just outside of my district. I've introduced in Congress a bill called the No Goshen Act with Congressman John Mullenhour of Michigan. We have bipartisan support. I think we have 50 co-sponsors on the bill to raise awareness that we shouldn't be giving a nickel of taxpayer money to a Chinese company that wants to come here and set up shop in Illinois. Secondarily, J.B. Pritzker has authorized to give $500 million in Illinois tax money to this company that, again, is directly tied to the Chinese Communist Party. We're essentially feeding the hand of the Chinese government to hurt the United States. You mentioned it. Goshen is also involved in slave labor camps. If you think about the Uyghur population in Western China and the forced education camps there, the slave labor camps there, that have fully engaged in the annihilation of the Uyghur people, which is a Muslim minority there. You know, it's interesting. Democrats love to raise awareness on human rights and slave labor and violations of people's rights, except here. And I don't think it's any coincidence that Goshen, as a Chinese company, decided to go to Michigan with a Democrat governor, Gretchen Whitmer, and then to come to Illinois with a liberal governor in J.B. Pritzker. We had a hearing last Friday morning in Green Township. It was a packed room. We invited Goshen to come to the hearing. They were silent. They didn't show up. They didn't make an appearance, which I think says it all. We had a very vibrant, lively hearing, a very substantive hearing with subject matter experts that directly tied Goshen to the Communist Chinese Party. So we're going to continue to raise awareness on this. I serve on the Select Committee on China, which is a bipartisan committee looking into the malign activities of the CCP. What we anticipate is having a hearing in Illinois sometime soon to continue to raise awareness on this.
Well, thank you so much, Representative, for joining me, this conservative cat, and good luck on your bill. I know that they're fighting for it at a local level, the Mantenoans. They are fighting a lawsuit. They've gone as far as to talk about the quarry blasts, where there's quarry blasts that happen, and they're saying, hey, this is unsafe to put EV batteries and store batteries here, because it could explode, cause a fire if the quarry blasts the debris. pops into the plant where they're planning on putting this thing. So there's all kinds of lawsuits out there as well, folks. Representative, thank you so much, and you have a great day.
Thank you, Kat. Take care.